Let's have a look at this, which is on page 15, everyone. Ahuriri Estuary Committee, and I will get the Chief Executive to take us through this item, please.
Thank you, Mr Chairman, and apologies once again for having omitted to include the attachment in the actual agenda item. But this, or the gist of this particular item has been to you before. It's really around a desire by Mana Ahuriri as one of the treaty settlement groups in Hawke's Bay to have recognition given to the Ahuriri Estuary itself, and the manner by which that's being proposed to be undertaken is through the establishment of the Ahuriri Estuary Committee, which would then be formally drafted into their treaty settlement. Originally, in fact up until about last week, it was hoped that the settlement would be signed in December. That's now been pushed out to mid-March for reasons that are not related to this particular item, but are other reasons to do with the negotiations. However, the Office of Treaty Settlements would still appreciate an answer from Council sooner rather than later, so that the finalising of the terms can be included in the drafting up of the legislation, which and the settlement itself, which takes a few months to do. So, look, the key points of the actual terms of reference that have been outlined is that the Ahuriri Estuary Committee would be established through legislation. It would be a permanent committee, standalone, and multi-party. So you can see in the paper the number, or in the clauses, I beg your pardon, who those parties are. It's essentially the first and foremost Mana Ahuriri, but also the Department of Conservation, the Hastings and Napier Councils, as well as the Hawke's Bay Regional Council. And really the purpose of that committee is to provide some guidance and coordination around the management of the wider Ahuriri Estuary. We, back in November last year, you noted that the committee the final fully established committee will have a councillor representative on it. That's not asking for this decision to be made today, but really this is the output of what's been worked through over the last few months between all the parties that are involved as a basis for establishing the final terms of reference for the committee. The committee itself won't be formally established until the settlement legislation passes, which at this stage is expected to be early in 2016. And as I've said, the Office of Treaty Settlements is seeking approval from all three councils for the draft clauses as they're set out, and for further finalisation and negotiation to occur. So that's really the basis of that. One more thing I'll add, which is not in the paper, and which I actually meant to include in notices, is that the first reading of the Hawke's Bay Regional Planning Committee bill will be about 11:40 next Wednesday in Parliament. So that's a milestone as well. Next Wednesday, the Guy Fawkes Day, 5th of November.
Okay, any questions? Councillor Belford.
I have a series of questions about this. Starting with 9.5 in the covering memo.
Yep.
We were given a little taste of this in our workshop the other day with the planning committee, but what is could you just remind me the weighting of this plan that the group would come up with? The reference here is a statutory weighting of have regard to.
Sure.
Could you just explain that again?
I'll try my best. Within the context of the Resource Management Act, there are different weightings given to different documents that any decision maker who's developing a plan must adhere to, and the strongest one of those is give effect to, and that's a requirement, for example, on district and city councils and the regional council to give effect to a regional policy statement. The next layer down, if you like, is have regard to, and that is really have to be cognizant of the desires or the objectives of what's in that particular document, and try and incorporate those into the final planning document. And then the third one is take into account, which means that some consideration must be given to that. So it's really a hierarchy, if you like, of acknowledgements and responsibilities. So have regard to is fairly high up there.
Yep. Okay. The next question I have is, in the document you just handed out, item 15 on page 5 talks about the membership.
Yes.
In every other discussion we've had about this estuary and how it might be governed in the future, there has been a lot of affirmation that there would be a much wider range of parties involved in the outcome. Environmental groups that have been working in that area have expressed concern about being included in any planning process and so forth. This looks to be a purely council, iwi or hapu body, and it just scanning this document you just gave us, it doesn't appear that there's any particular recognition of other stakeholders and what concerns they might have in the management of this. So is that something to be concerned about?
The actual makeup of the committee itself is what you're referring to there, and that is quite prescriptive, and I agree it's sort of really allied to mana Ahuriri and relevant local and central government agencies. In terms of the how the main requirement of that committee is to prepare a plan for the wider estuary area, and certainly when you look through the remainder of the terms of reference or the guiding notes around how that's to be done, there's quite a strong emphasis on engaging with all other agencies and organisations that have an interest in the estuary. So it's part of the collaborative plan development process, rather than having them all sitting on the committee.
Well, then I'll go back to my first question, because we have a tank group, for example, that certainly sees planning for this particular body of water as part of its mandate, and that's a much broader group of people, and the issue has come up there already, foreshadowing that this process was underway. Who ultimately is on first base or home plate, and use a U.S. example, it is World Series time. How does this fit together at the end of the day? This is being given a legislated status, and when you read through this, it sure looks like this is where the final say is meant to reside, and I think members of the tank group would be quite surprised to think that that was in fact what the intent was.
Okay, so the committee itself is statutory. That is has been agreed between the Office of Treaty Settlements and the Treaty Settlement Group itself, mana Ahuriri. So that part of it is set in legislation. What they have really, I guess, incorporated then beneath that is a planning process to capture the particular values that they ascribe to the Ahuriri Estuary. If you look at on page 10 at number 44, and sorry, I do realise that you haven't had a chance to read right through this, but you'll see how in preparing or changing a relevant RMA planning document, so let's say that's a plan change to incorporate the findings of the tank process, a local authority, which would be the regional council, must have regard to this plan to the extent that the contents of Te Muruai o Te Whanga plan are relevant to the resource management issues of the tank area. In doing so in the most appropriate way of achieving the purpose of the Resource Management Act. So I don't see that overriding what has been agreed to through the tank process. In fact, I see it as enhancing what's there. I don't genuinely believe, for example, that the Te Muruai Te Whanga plan would be looking at things like minimum flows and other aspects and water allocation and those other things that the tank process would be looking at. Don't forget, because it's got the district councils and city council involved as well, it's as much likely to be looking at the land use as anything that we would be managing through the tank process. So in a sense, it's likely to enhance the outputs from tank rather than to clash with them.
So can I just follow up, because I mean I'm getting quite concerned about this beginning to look like a real mishmash to me. We've got this entity, we've got the tank process, we've got the regional planning committee that's going to be overseeing this as well, plus the regional council that's got to be obeisant to its own, regional planning documents and so forth. And you end up with a huge amount of overlap and a huge amount of extra work for our staff here who have to service all of these entities.
I guess you could look at it that way. I mean, another way of looking at it, if you like, is the output from this is perhaps equivalent to a hapu management plan, which again, council must have regard to, and looking at how it writes its policies and rules within the functions that we have. My sense of this committee is that it's far more aspirational than the nuts and bolts of a regional plan is. Certainly for the Mana Ahuriri settlement people, treaty people. So while yes, there is potentially a number of inputs into a plan change coming from all directions, that's not a new thing for us. We've had tuk stakeholder groups, and we've had the regional planning committee before, and we've had regional council, so it's something that has to be managed. But I think we need to come back to the underlying rationale for this, which is to recognise the importance that one of our treaty partners gives to this particular location.
There's other questions, but I'll end up back with Councillor Balfour.
Pick up because I have had a query from people involved in this. There has been a group operating around the estuary called the Ahuriri Estuary Protection Society for many years, and in fact they were given an award, an environmental award, along with Transit New Zealand and the relevant hapu when the new expressway was put in across there, for the work that they did. It is their concern that their views are going to disappear out of this. And I'm sorry, I didn't have a chance to have a really good read of this, but coming into the functions of the committee under 8, the closest I can get, because communicating with stakeholders, well, you could come back to the stakeholders are the various members of the committee, the statutory bodies. A lot of these terms do not actually define who it is that's going to be involved. The only one that I can find that would provide them with any comfort is to provide a wider forum for the community to express its views. I think this committee, this group, and this is only a small group of people, but they have been dedicated workers to restoring that estuary and enhancing it and to maintaining it, the welfare of it. That while not necessarily wanting to be on the committee, they'd like the assurance that their views are going to be heard and that they're going to be, these groups will eventually disappear. And so this is a long-term committee, and we recognise that some of these groups this one's lasted a long time, but they eventually actually don't renew with younger members, and so there's often a limited life of them. But I think from my point of view, it's actually being able to give assurance that they're not just suddenly going to find a notice in the paper that this is, send in an answer to this and that's your community views, or, how do they get their contribution and their views actually heard?
Well, this is sort of similar to a point that Councillor Belford
It
raised
is,
as
but I
well.
want to be quite
Um,
specific that I can't find it in these terms of reference that
Okay.
would give them,
27, does 27 answer that or not? Sorry, just.
what's clause 27? Well, they may.
They may,
That
yes.
doesn't mean they will.
So what I'm hearing, I mean, because you'd be aware, this is not the final
No.
output. What I'm hearing from all around the table is perhaps that we go back and as part of the finalising of the detail, look at, even though they may not be formally on the committee, look at a much stronger requirement for this committee to engage with recognised other agent or other organisations, and not necessarily agencies.
These groups recognise that they're not statutory, and
Yes.
it is on the goodwill of the people that is there. But while they're there,
Yeah.
what assurance do they have that they're suddenly all their work's not going to be?
Yes.
Just with regard to the points that have been raised by both Councillors Belford and Scott, if you added an extra function under 8, which required this entity to consult with other interested groups, I mean, I'm not going to try and come up with the wording here, but I think it would be quite possible to add an extra bullet point there that could cover off on that.
Nominate the group.
There seems to be an apprehension that this committee, if it comes into existence, will extinguish somehow the rights of other entities to submit to the council. I would have thought that the group that Councillor Scott spoke about will still continue to have the right to come to this council and express its own views, and the council, when it's making its decisions, will have regard to the Ahuriri Committee, and can have regard to the views of other committees before it makes its final decision. This is only expressing one form of input. It's not saying this form of input to the exclusion and extinguishing of all other views.
It's also part of a treaty process.
Yes.
The other point. I'll come to Mr. Mohi and then Councillor Belford.
This is a treaty claim. This is one of the Mana Ahuriri's bottom lines. And if these other groups come along, and I might be a little bit rude here, but as far as they're concerned, they're holding onto the steering wheel and they want to hold on to it as part of their claim. And they see the other groups as invited guests when they invite them. And as far as the management, regional planning committee, all the Maori members would step back and say, Mana Ahuriri, what do you want? That would be the same with the tank group, with the Māori members there. Make no mistake, this is a real bottom line for them, and they want to be in charge. They don't want to exclude people. It's almost racialism in reverse, because they're the ones that will invite the white people to be the advisory people instead of the other way around. It'll be a very nice day.
Well, I had Councillor Belford lined up, and then
Well, I mean, I just feel like we have very prescriptive legislation here, right down to the decimal point of what a quorum is and so on and so forth. And how many of these are we going to have? I mean, we have X number of treaty settlement groups out there. We were told initially that we had a regional planning committee whose role was to be jointly with us the decision maker on RMA related matters. That seems a perfectly appropriate, sensible way to proceed. And now coming in behind it, we have what appears to be likely to be a whole series of legislative acts that tell us how to deal with this bit or that bit or the next bit. And, you know, can't somebody remind the Office of Treaty Settlement that they created a regional planning committee that was supposed to have this function with some sense of overview of how these matters should be dealt with on a region-wide basis?
Councillor Graham.
Some very good points have been made here, and but I accept Mr. Mohi's position. This is a treaty claim. I actually think they will do a particular good job of this particular claim that they've got in place, and protecting this estuary. But I do think, and Mr. Mohi was quite strict there, that they need to be cognizant of these people who have done a huge amount of work, who aren't necessarily tangata whenua, but actually are tangata whenua really. These people that have gone down there and worked hard and dug things and planted things, and we've all watched as we go to the airport what a wonderful job they've done. And I just don't think you can go off and just say these people don't exist anymore and they're just to be invited here. So we need to be cognizant of the people that have done the hard work to date. But having said that, this is not for discussion here. This is part of a treaty claim, and we have to get on with it. One of the things that I'd like to know here, it's got one representative. When it comes to DOC, it hasn't got that. Is it one representative from DOC? So there's 4.
Oh, I think that's an omission, councillor. There should be one representative.
So there's going to be one representative from all these different people.
Yes. From
elected, and one's the statutory authority, and 4 from the hapu. 50-50.
Councillor Dick.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm not too concerned about the complexities of this. I think the plan itself will probably come down to about 4 pages, and the committee would probably meet after an establishment phase, maybe once a year. There does seem, in my view, there needs to be some recognition on the side, if you like, Mr. Mohi, of the Ahuriri Estuary Protection Society, because they are the people that pick up the rubbish and do the planting on a regular basis, and they've done it for years and years and years. So you don't want to be casting them aside. The other thing that I just mentioned in terms of integration across with this and across the organisation, Toro Waka, the co-chair of the Joint Plan Committee, was the supervisor manager of the major Conservation Corps scheme in the late 1980s that did the restoration of the estuary and turned it from an industrial wasteland into the well-treed and pathed and the excellent facility that it is today. So he knows all about it. I was his boss then.
Right, we've got a few more questions coming around. I think the point that maybe we're missing here is all the good work that's been done. I don't think this new committee is going to want to roar off and do something totally different. We all want a better place, so I'll make that point as we carry on. Councillor Scott, we'll work around the table.
I'd just like to raise some questions around the funding for this committee, because clearly there is going to be the cost, and you have likened this to doing a hapu management plan, and if we actually accept the responsibility costs around all of those, then we are going to have quite... This is absolutely no disrespect to mana Ahuriri. It is directed directly at the government's failure to meet the full obligations under treaty settlement, and a lot of these costs are being shifted onto the ratepayers, and the ratepayers wake up too late to find that they've got significant rate increases to pick up on treaty settlement issues, which is not actually their doing. So I'm not too sure how much you have actually gone into the details of servicing this committee, or how much it's going to cost. I absolutely support mana Ahuriri's bottom line with this, but I do question where the government is actually forcing the costs to lie.
In terms of the actual servicing of the committee, there will be no cost to the Regional Council. But in terms of preparing the plan, there will be the costs of any staff contributions that need to be made, whether it's in the form of a science report or investigations, or some planning assistance from Helen's team, that will have to be factored into work programs, starting in 2016, looking at that. But the actual committee itself, no.
Cost around doing something like that?
Yes. Look, I don't know. Haven't really
But
sat down.
it doesn't come for nothing, does it?
No, it doesn't.
So thanks, Chair. I just want to understand the legal status of this document when it's taken further, when it's finalised. Does this become part of legislation and as part of the treaty claim legislation for this particular claimant group?
Yes, so it will be finalised in the deed of settlement that they sign, and then the specifics around this committee will be part of the treaty legislation that will be drafted concurrently with the deed of settlement, but won't be passed presumably until it gets its turn in the House, so probably early 2016.
But the terms of this committee,
Yes.
will become part of that legislation.
Yes. So if you look at the actual columns, or the you've got section, recording document, purpose, author comments across the top.
Yeah.
Recording document, legislation, and the deed. So and in some cases the terms of reference as well. But you can see that the bulk of this will be in both the legislation and in the deed.
Okay.
Further questions, Councillor Barker?
My first question is, could you go back and outline to us the process that the council has used to engage in the negotiations and with councillors? And I do so because I feel that some councillors are a little apprehensive about this, because it seems that this is a fait accompli, it's done, and it may have been a process where this was agreed, it was sort of outlined in principle, the early form of it, come back, at that point councillors could have folded their ideas into it, then had part of it. It seems now that when we're down to drafting legislation and the deed of settlement, going through that, it's pretty late for input. So I raise that. And the second point, the next part that I want to follow on from that is, if we're engaged, the council's engaged in these things, I support it entirely, but I just think we can enhance the process here so people, as we move through it, feel comfortable about where we've got to and input can be into it. The second question is a little finicky one, but I'm intrigued in 47 that the Department of Conservation requirement on them is to take into account. They've escaped with a much lesser obligation than ourselves, and I wonder why that is, considering that they have the most resources and the most influence over this particular area of anybody. How do we let them get off with that?
I'll answer that question first. The answer is I don't know how they got away with that. But in coming back to the main point which you've raised about the process, and this really, I guess, also hopefully will cover off some of Councillor Belford's issues around, we've had a regional planning committee, how we ended up with this as well. When we've gone through the process of each of the treaty settlements in Hawke's Bay, more recently, the Office of Treaty Settlement has focused a lot of resource in Hawke's Bay to get these settlements completed. And we, the Regional Council, have been involved in all of them in some way or another. So not just around the establishment of the Regional Planning Committee to address their cultural redress aspirations around managing natural resources, but also each of the treaty groups has had various other aspirations or redress that they've sought that's actually involved either land that we own or some aspect of that we manage. So we've dealt with each of them in addition to the Regional Planning Committee on a case-by-case basis. Sure. This particular committee, the Ahuriri Estuary Committee, is that individual case from Mana Ahuriri. This is their big desire and always has been since the start of their treaty negotiations, to have a much greater say in the management of the Ahuriri Estuary. So this is really their bottom line, if you like, and we've worked, like I said, with, for example, Ngāti Pahawera around gravel extraction requirements, with MITI around forestry management and how we can use funds from that in their rohi. This is the Mana Ahuriri one. So that process has been done really on a case-by-case basis, and in each instance, we've reported back to council, or we've discussed with council, gone away, talked with either directly with the hapu or collectively with the Crown as well, on how we can progress each of these issues, and then come back and reported them to council. So this is really following that particular process, councillor. And last year, and it was nearly 12 months ago, but some things do take time. We did, sort of outline to you the basis of this particular discussion, the principles around having an Ahuriri Estuary Committee, and said that we would come back once we had some drafting provisions in place, and that's really only just occurred in the last month.
I'll just follow up on that. My question is that, because Councillor Scott is raising a point on behalf of groups that have been very active in here, and feels that they might feel at the end of the process excluded, and so we've got that concern. On the other side of it, we've got the concern that this is almost a done deal. So do you think we can enhance our processes so that the concerns that Councillor Scott and others would raise about matters like this can be put into the process earlier rather than when we're getting to the lead stage, so that they feel that their concerns have been heard, can be amended, adapted, included if that's what people feel, or discarded for these reasons? Because I feel that I get the sense that people feel that it's almost too late to put this in at this point. Can we enhance that engagement with the people, with the executive team of council involved in the negotiations, to involve councillors earlier and more in depth, so that these concerns can come to the surface quicker?
I mean, certainly, this is probably unique in what we've had to deal with so far, and that there are a number of other organisations that have this significant interest in the health of the Ahuriri Estuary, as opposed to other matters that we've dealt with in the past, which have been quite unique to the hapu. Certainly we can take that lesson on board and improve our processes around any future negotiations.
Would be helpful. Just to further elaborate, though, the Chief Executive and myself did have an afternoon with these people looking at this. How long ago was that now?
4 months ago.
4 months ago, with the Mayor of Napier and his Chief Executive. So we did have some input. It was pretty clunky to start with, to be fair, but it has come a long way. And I think the point to make now is these are draft clauses. One of the recommendations when we get to them is to allow our Chief Executive to continue shaping it to make it more user-friendly, so including some of the concerns. But if there's a better way to do it, why wouldn't we do it? And I agree with you. Yeah. Mr. Mohi, and then Councillor Belford.
Sorry.
With your microphone.
100%. Quite often what the Crown negotiates with iwi groups is passed directly to the councils, and that's sort of a fact of life. Peter from our committee, Peter Baku, said that councils are just the Crown and drag. Just in terms of the tank process, I was talking to one of the chief negotiators of Mana Ahuriri, and at the start they were quite upset and said, well, they can talk all they like, but we're in charge. So you've got that little feeling, similar to what Councillor Scott's saying, well, hey, we've been doing all the work and suddenly why aren't we? So if you reverse the process, people are feeling a little bit finicky. And as I said, I can't stress enough, this is one of the real bottom lines, because there's a whole lot of houses out there which the council claim is on their land. It's actually on these people's land. So, we'll forget about that $80 million you got from the ACC. This is what they're saying. For when the land came up and you built on it, it's really their land, what they're claiming. Go back to Heisha thing. So would it be possible to invite the chief negotiator for Mana Ahuriri to have a short cordial with the council, either in the workshop or in a meeting?
That would be most appropriate, and in fact, I've already had an approach from the chief negotiator for Hei Takatini for them to come and present their aspirations to the council. We've agreed on that the last meeting before Christmas. I think it's 17th or 18th of December. If we could perhaps get Mana Ahuriri along the same day, that would be fantastic as well. I think it would be a really good additional step for the council to understand what the aspirations of the various treaty groups are, and particularly those two, because they do cover a significant proportion of our region.
If we could have a bit of a gap between them because they don't like one another.
Councillor Balfour, did you have another question?
Well,
Then, okay, we'll get through the questions, we'll get to the recommendations.
Yeah, no, I just want to back up. I'd really like to hear a little bit more about the process and about the various aspirations, because in here it talks about the Te Kanano model, which is the seed model, and it's based on tikanga as well in Māori, and I think there's a bit of a difference between the way that we approach things when it comes to environmental issues and Māori do. And to understand that, I think, is really a key issue for us, to give us a little bit of comfort, I suppose. I think there's a bit of tension that most probably what we're doing is not going to be continued by this new committee. And that might not be the case at all. It's just a different way of doing things. So I'd really welcome a chance to actually talk more about this particular model that they're basing the care of the estuary of.